friends, and welcome back to the Lefty Agenda. I hope you all are surviving the capitalist wasteland as best as you can. Today, we are going to be talking about something a little bit darker than some of my other left-wing topics, but I think it's important to be aware of. The word incel has become more popular in recent years, sparking a lot of controversy and discussion. Yet there are still some folks out there who don't take incels as seriously as I think we need to as a society. This video will be the first part in a series on the manosphere and the dangers of extreme misogyny. It would be easy to sit here and dunk on incels and list off 101 reasons why they're bad and dangerous, but I don't want to do that. My goal here is to bring some light onto the actions of the manosphere and hopefully show that it's not just a silly internet fad, but an immensely dangerous ideology. I would also like to educate us on some of the signs to watch out for so that we as a community can protect each other from becoming victims, men and women alike. Without further ado, fasten your seatbelts and take your blue pills because it's time to talk about the manosphere. There is a major content warning for sexism, sexual assault, murder, potentially suicide as well, so keep that in your minds. To answer the question of what an incel is, we have to travel back to a simpler time, the 90s. The 90s brought us many new and exciting inventions. We got the Nintendo 64, text messaging, Tickle Me Elmo dolls, and most importantly, me. Sometime in the mid-90s, a woman known as Elena started a website called Elena's Involuntary Celibacy Project. Elena wanted a place for people, herself included, to be able to vent their frustrations and unhappiness with dating. It was basically a support group for folks who weren't having any luck finding a partner. The website was initially created for men and women alike. Elena moved on and, as most young adults do, began having more success in romance and ended up giving the website to somebody else. Little did she know the positive support group she created would turn into something completely unrecognizable over the next 20 to 30 years. Doing a quick search of the term incel on Urban Dictionary describes it as such: involuntary celibate, someone who is called celibate but doesn't want to be. This is correct, but it doesn't tell the entire story. Inceldom has mutated into an ideology that is anti-feminist, anti-women, pro-toxic masculinity, and often pro-violence. Misogyny and treating women as objects is something that extends outside of the realm of incels, but incels turn it up to 11. Browsing an incel forum or website, you will likely see rape, murder, and misogynistic jokes and phrases that exceed your average frat boy and just general misogynist. As an example, browsing an incel site, I saw a post asking which country has the most R-word foids. A foid or a femoid is a slang term for female robot, basically a dehumanization tactic used by incels. Most of the replies to that post stated all of them. Now, obviously, this is absolutely disgusting on multiple levels, but that is just the beginning. The majority of incels believe women hold sex over the heads of men and only give sex to men who are the wealthiest and best looking. You might be thinking, wow, that's a very broad statement, and you'd be correct. But incels don't look at situations with nuance. Women all seem to be the same in their eyes, only differing from one another based on physical attractiveness. A man who is extremely attractive and gets women is called a Chad, and a woman who is attractive is called a Stacy. Chads get all the Stacys, and some men get girls less attractive than Stacys, but incels can't get any partner because they believe that they are at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to the physical features of desire. Already, I'm sure you can see how damaging this can be to a group of people's self-worth, tying it to attractiveness. It also has to be terribly depressing to think that you would never find a partner or companionship. If we follow this train of unhealthy logic along the tracks, then we inevitably get to a toxic masculinity station. If women are holding sex over these men's head, then according to them, it's women's fault for not giving them what they feel entitled to. This creates a culture that idolizes rape and violence because it's only seen as taking back what is owed to them. It also fuels a never-ending cycle of connecting one's manhood and self-worth into having sex. And when that doesn't happen, the individual feels like a failure and becomes more bitter towards the opposite sex, which in turn usually makes them less desirable to women, and so on and so forth. Inceldom isn't something that appeared overnight. It has been a culture developing over the course of many years. According to the book Men Who Hate Women by Laura Bates, studies show that the majority of incels are single white men in their 20s to 30s that have grown up right next to the internet. It's also no coincidence that the alt-right bloomed right next to the incel movement. As I stated in my video on fascism, a key pillar of fascist ideology is toxic masculinity, which fits perfectly into the incel ideology. The groups share many of the same ideas, and racism runs rampant on incel forums just as misogyny does in white supremacy gathering places. In 2014, the infamous Gamergate controversy busts onto the scene, and in many ways kickstarts the neckbeard revolution. To give you a brief overview of Gamergate, a false accusation turned into an online harassment campaign against female game developers that spiraled into an anti-women and anti-feminist movement. Misogyny has always existed, but this event was the catalyst that radicalized many incels. The last safe haven these toxic men thought they had were their precious video games, and when the feminists came for those, it was basically a proclamation of war, and the bloodshed would be great. Gamergate effectively red-pilled many online users into extreme sexism. Red-pilled refers to the movie Matrix, which ironically was written by two trans women. By taking the red pill, you choose to leave your old life behind and see the world for how it really is, instead of a simulated universe and society. It's the giant conspiracy of women not wanting to bang you. Black-pilled refers to when an incel has reached his final form, basically, and has truly given up on any hope of ever finding a mate. The majority of black-pilled posts I've seen on forums are nihilistic and included thoughts of roping, which is to take one's own life because of the despair they now have to live in. It is not uncommon to see users giving each other advice on how to commit suicide. Normally I would provide the websites and sources for some of these quotes, but I really don't advise reading through much of them. Any functioning person will lose sleep over seeing it. If you're thinking this is all sounding insane, I would agree with you. A few years ago, I would have shrugged it off as some kind of weird toxic fringe group, but it's not, and on the contrary, I believe it's something we need to take seriously because us and our loved ones' lives could be at stake. Laura Bates argues in her book, Men Who Hate Women, that the media refuses to call incels who act on their ideology what they actually are, terrorists. As stated before, the incel community often overlaps with the alt-right and racist groups, so when an attack takes place, the reports tend to ignore the incel side of them and focus on other flawed aspects of the perpetrator. Here's another huge content warning here because the following stories can be hard to sit through. Skip to the time you see on the screen if you want to continue on in the video. On August 4th, 2009, 48-year-old George Sodoni brought 4 handguns into an LA fitness gym, killing 3 women and injuring 9, and eventually killing himself. It was later found out that Sodoni ran a blog discussing his unluckiness with women, stating that young women, or young white hoes as he puts it, always went for black guys, which is a common theme throughout the incel community. Notes were also found in his gym bag saying that he had never spent a weekend with a woman or lived with a woman and had few sexual experiences. Though not proven, I think most can assume that he went to the gym with the purpose of murdering women. May 23, 2014, 22-year-old Elliot Rogers went on a killing spree, murdering 6 people and injuring 14. At some point, he knocked on the door of a sorority house, and when nobody answered, he started shooting at a woman nearby, and eventually turning the gun on himself. Shortly before he started his rampage, he uploaded a YouTube video titled Elliot Rogers' Day of Retribution, where he specifically calls out women for rejecting him, stating that he's forced to live a life of loneliness and despair, because he's still a virgin. He calls himself the perfect guy, the supreme gentleman, and says he must punish women for what they've done to him. Rogers proves to be one of the most influential and infamous killers in the incel ideology, primarily because of his outward acknowledgement and online presence. It is not uncommon to see users on incel forums with ER in the usernames referring to Elliot Rogers, or stating that they are going to ER, meaning go on a killing spree. October 1st, 2015, 26-year-old student Chris Harper Mercer entered a classroom at a college and forced everybody into the center of the room. He shot and killed 9 people, including himself. When inspecting the manifesto he left behind after the shooting, it included the fact that he was a virgin with no girlfriend and referred to Elliot Rogers as elite and someone who stood with the gods. It also referred to black men as thugs and stated girls would rather go with them than men like him. November 2nd, 2018, 40-year-old Scott Beerley, may have pronounced that wrong, shot 6 women, killing 2 of them before killing himself at a hot yoga studio in Tallahassee, Florida. After the incident, Beerley's YouTube channel was found, which included a mass amount of incel content, in which he states women are terrible for rejecting him and spews racist statements like women are betraying the blood for being in interracial relationships. He also sympathizes with Elliot Rogers, stating Rogers' situation of not getting any love was a wasteland that breeds his longing and frustration, which is obviously disgusting. I could go on, but I think that the point is clear. In the past decade and a half, we are seeing an increase in the amount of attacks done in the name of inceldom. These are not only blatant terrorist attacks against women, but also show us how the incel community is becoming more and more bold with its extremist views. Clearly, the killers in these stories have serious mental health issues that also play a role in what led them to their decisions to go on mass killings, but it's the toxic cocktail of mental illness, isolation, and the simmering hatred of women that cause these kind of events to take place. Do I think that all incels are plotting to do this? Absolutely not. But if this movement continues to gain momentum, I believe we will continue to see an increase in the amount of crimes committed by individuals in the name of inceldom. I've been very vocal about my fears of the far right. Watch my video on fascism to get my steamy takes on those. But what scares me the most about incels and fascism alike is a term that I've coined as the ideology of blame. The ideology of blame, as I've come to call it, is basically this: the scapegoating or blaming of all political, societal, and cultural failings onto a single group of individuals because of a defining characteristic of that group. So to a neo-Nazi, they might say that Jews are the reason society has all the flaws it does. To a Trump supporter, it might be immigrants. To an incel, it's women. They have become frustrated because they feel they are not getting what they're entitled to as men by the women they choose. In the ideology of blame, it rarely, if ever, takes into consideration the feeling or desires or humanity of the group that is being aimed to scapegoat. Incels believe in this paradoxical reality that women are simultaneously the most powerful creatures because they hold sex over the heads of all men, and the weakest creatures that should be forced into giving that sex away. I want to be clear, I don't believe that there's anything wrong with a person being sad or embarrassed when that person is rejected by somebody. Those are natural human emotions and feelings, and it's okay to feel them. What is absolutely not okay is to turn that around and blame the person who rejected you for causing those emotions. An individual has complete and total autonomy over their life and their decisions. They can and should reject somebody they do not wish to be sexually or romantically involved with, and they don't even owe an explanation for that. The thought process that is the most frightening with any ideology of blame is when it strips the person of that autonomy, when a person is dehumanized and no longer an individual in the eyes of the ideology, but just a part of that group that's being attempted to scapegoat the problems. What is unique to the incel movement is, rather than mass deportation or even extermination of the group, the thing that they most desire is to be accepted by this group, by force if necessary. It is common to see posts on incel gathering places about forcing oneself on a woman and legalizing rape. I cannot begin to tell you how absolutely disgusting and repulsive some of the discussions get, but it could make the most staunch Republicans sit back and say, well, fuck. The thing that's most sad about any ideology of blame, incels included, is that it's never the fault of the scapegoat that they have chosen. Nothing in life or society is ever that easy. Oftentimes it seems they have dug themselves into their own grave by carrying these misogynistic ideas into their relationships with coworkers, friends, and even family members. This argument is worn out by this point, but it does hold water. If you think women are beneath you, then you probably aren't going to attract a lot of women to hang out with you. Attractiveness isn't a scale that any person can measure. If it were, then I'd never have been in a relationship. But in all seriousness, there are going to be people out there that make relationship decisions based on attraction alone, but there are equally as many people who make it based on more personal connections they feel with an individual, and both are valid ways of living someone's life. I guess what I'm saying is don't forfeit yourself into the never-ending loneliness facade because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But an incel would be calling me a blue-pilled normie right now from that whole spiel, so let's go ahead and move on. This part will be short, but I figured it was worth mentioning. One thing you'll consistently see on manosphere gathering places is a dedication to irony and memes. It is similar to the memes that would pop up in alt-right communities. The reason for this is simple. If everything appears as a joke, then the one telling the joke can always maintain a level of plausible deniability. If you were to call somebody out on a horrific joke that was made about rape or white supremacy even, they can easily turn the conversation around and call you a little baby PC snowflake who doesn't want people to have fun. The idea that anyone could make a light-hearted rape joke is disgusting to me, but defining the line between troll and legitimate sexist can be difficult, and it often plays into the twisted game that they're trying to play when you argue with them. I suggest picking your battles. Having a face-to-face conversation with people will almost always heed more results than arguing online. The longer that we don't address sexist comments from the people we interact with, the more normalized it becomes. When a sexist joke is told with no repercussions, it can further push someone down the alt-right pipeline and red pill them even further. That's what makes combating these movements so difficult. They have developed a code in which only people who have the cipher to that code know how to crack it, and know that it isn't even a code at all. It's just vague enough that nobody will know that what they're actually thinking, and they're able to deny their true thoughts and practices at every turn. It's a genius idea that keeps the entire incel community from being taken nearly as seriously as I think it ought to be. I think in any scenario where we on the left are trying to de-radicalize someone on the right, it's important that we keep in mind that they are a person as well, and they may have ended up in the situation they are in due to a number of unfortunate circumstances. Oftentimes, young boys who struggle with mental illness or unstable family lives are seeking out a community to feel at home with, and can get swept in by the incel movement with deception and lies. Partner that with the loneliness and isolation that comes from being involved in such a toxic community, and it starts to paint a picture of some very misguided young men. This isn't to excuse the heinous actions they may have taken, but I do think it's critical that we provide support for young men looking to leave the incel community and to stop young men from getting involved in it. The book I've been using as a source for much of this video, Men Who Hate Women, was written by Laura Bates, who operates the Everyday Sexism Project, and does many speaking events involving education on feminist issues to help women and men better understand the inequality that we are faced with every day. I highly suggest looking into the Everyday Sexism Project. I will link it down in the description. On the site, you will find stories from everyday people who have experienced sexism, and anyone can share their story on there as well. You'll also find resources to help victims of rape and sexual assault. Education, as in most cases, is key to swaying people away from toxic communities and pushing us towards a future that eventually overcomes this type of extreme misogyny. If you know someone who is an incel or just displays dangerous sexist rhetoric, I incline you to question them and their beliefs, push back against such a dangerous and hateful type of thinking, and above all else, be there for your communities and the women that are in your life. I think it's always better to take a stand rather than let it happen, of course. Well, if you've made it this far in the video, I definitely thank you. This was a little bit of a longer one, a little bit of a heavier topic, so I'm very glad that you're here. But if you liked it, please leave a like on the video, subscribe, leave a comment. It always helps me and probably helps in the YouTube algorithm. I do have a new podcast that I'm doing. It's called Remarks, which is Remarx. I'll link that down in the description as well. It's me and a good friend of mine just talking about some leftist shit and whatnot. So if you want to check that out, please do. I think we're pretty funny. So but yeah, other than that, have a great rest of your day and just burn down capitalism. Do your best.